On May 12, 2025, the sun cast bright light across Portland's largest public green space, where families gathered with baskets, blankets, and laughter. Among the tall trees and open lawns, Raina Calder moved steadily along her routine patrol. She had worked as a park ranger for years, trained in both conservation and safety, always attentive to the balance between people and nature. Her role was not only to protect visitors, but also to safeguard the wildlife that drifted into the city's edges. Her peers respected Raina for her calm presence and quick thinking, traits she carried after years of dedication to outdoor service. Her life revolved around long walks, careful observation, and the quiet duty of making sure that parks remained safe for everyone who passed through them. As she inspected the area that day, the park was especially busy. The smell of grilled food lingered in the air, children ran across fields, and parents watched from shaded benches. Near the forest edge, an unusual figure appeared. A young black bear, thin but curious, had wandered out from the dense woods, drawn by the scent of food left behind on picnic tables. Its dark coat and restless steps caught immediate attention. Murmurs rippled across the crowd, and tension spread as it climbed onto a colorful playground structure, claws scraping against the metal and plastic. Visitors froze in alarm, unsure whether to stay or flee. The carefree energy of the park quickly gave way to fear. Raina recognized the danger. She moved forward, steady yet cautious, determined to steer the animal away before panic broke out. The bear, however, was no longer timid. Startled by the crowd and noise, it suddenly dropped from the play structure and turned its focus toward the ranger. In a blur of motion, the animal charged, covering the distance with terrifying speed. Before she could fully react, the heavy body slammed into her, knocking her onto the hard ground. The force drove the breath from her lungs as she tried to shield herself. Claws raked across her upper body, tearing into her uniform and skin, slicing deep along her shoulder and chest. Pain surged as bone cracked, a rib giving way under the pressure. She struggled to twist free, but the bear pressed on, striking again. Its paws ripped across her arm, leaving open wounds that bled freely. The ranger rolled in desperation, scraping against the dirt. Yet the animal followed, swiping at her back and sides with unrelenting force. Each blow added to the agony, leaving her body torn and battered. The scene unfolded in chaos. Families screamed, some clutching children and running, others frozen in horror. Food scattered from overturned baskets, and bicycles were abandoned as people scrambled for safety. Amid the terror, Raina's mind burned with one last thought of survival. Reaching to her side, she grabbed the flare gun she carried for emergencies. With trembling hands and fading strength, she raised it toward the animal, pulling the trigger. A burst of fire and smoke exploded into the air, searing the space between them. Startled by the sudden blast, the black bear reared back, its growl echoing across the park before it turned sharply toward the trees. Blood still poured from her wounds as the smoke drifted away, and the black bear vanished into the thick tree line. Raina lay sprawled across the dirt, her uniform shredded and her body trembling from shock. Her breaths came in short bursts, each one sharp with pain as the broken rib pressed against her chest. Around her, the once lively park was silent, except for scattered cries in the distance. Abandoned toys, spilled food, and overturned strollers painted the ground with the chaos that had just passed. People had fled to the far edges of the park, some hiding behind vehicles, while others clutched their children close, still unable to process the horror they had witnessed. Raina tried to move, but every shift sent new waves of agony across her back and arms. The deep gashes burned, and the blood loss left her weak. Crawling inch by inch, she dragged herself away from the open space, pushing toward a bench where she might rest out of view. Her hand left a trail of red across the grass, and the effort drained her of what little strength remained. She could not stand, but her will to survive pressed her forward. Finally reaching the wooden seat, she slumped against it, her vision blurring as dizziness overtook her. By then, emergency calls had flooded the local dispatch center. Sirens began to echo in the distance, growing louder as first responders rushed to the scene. Within minutes, paramedics entered the park, scanning the scattered crowd for injured victims. When they spotted the wounded ranger summer of 2017 in the dense forests of Montana's Glacier National Park, and the Johnson family was making the most of their long-anticipated summer camping trip. Chris, 45, had been planning this vacation for months, eager to share his love of the outdoors with his family. His wife Andrea, 38, was excited too, although she was a bit worried about exploring the great outdoors with a bunch of teenagers, their daughter, 13-year-old Mary, and their niece and nephew, 17-year-old Laura, and her 14-year-old brother Tommy. Fortunately, the trip had started out really well. Mary, Laura, and Tommy were all eager to explore, but they made sure to listen to Chris and Andrea and stick close. The park, known for its breathtaking mountain views, pristine lakes, and diverse wildlife, had always been on Chris's bucket list, and now he was finally here with the people he loved most, his wife and daughter, and his brother's children. With over 1 million acres of wilderness stretching across rugged mountains, alpine meadows, and dense forests, Montana's Glacier National Park is a place of stunning beauty and raw nature. Wildlife abounds in the park, including one of the world's most feared predators, the grizzly bear. The Johnsons knew the risks. They'd read all the warnings, attended the park's safety briefing, and stored their food properly to avoid attracting any unwanted visitors. They carried bear spray, a necessary precaution in grizzly country. As such, they felt confident in their preparations and were eager to explore. On the 4th day of their trip, the family set out on a hike to a remote lake that Chris had read about. It was a clear, sunny afternoon, and the trail led them through dense woods and up a gentle slope, offering occasional glimpses of the towering peaks in the distance. The kids were full of energy, laughing and talking as they walked, while Chris and Andrea followed close behind, soaking in the peaceful surroundings. They had no idea that danger was silently stalking them, just out of sight. A large grizzly bear had caught the family's scent earlier that day, but the Johnsons were unaware of the immense danger they were in. Drawn by curiosity and hunger alike, the bear had been following them from afar for hours, its massive paws moving silently over the forest floor. Grizzlies in Glacier National Park are known to be unpredictable, especially in late summer when food can be scarce. This particular bear, a lone male, had been struggling to find enough food and was growing increasingly desperate. The scent of the family had been too tempting to ignore. Any promise of food was better than nothing. It happened just a mile from the lake. The family, eager to relax, hurried through the final stretch of the trail. They didn't notice the massive blur of fur and muscle barreling through the trees. Then Chris was on his back, and the grizzly bear was upon him. The impact was like being hit by a train. The bear knocked Chris to the ground, its enormous paws raking across his chest with terrifying force. Blood spattered the ground as Chris screamed in agony, his screams loud at first, then quieter and quieter. Andrea and the kids froze in shock. They couldn't believe their eyes. One moment, they were enjoying a peaceful hike, and the next, Chris was on the ground, bleeding profusely, a grizzly bear towering over him. How did this happen? Andrea's heart broke as she watched the love of her life being mauled. Instinctively, she fumbled for the bear spray, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get the safety cap off. The kids were screaming, their faces pale with terror, but they were rooted to the spot, unable to tear their eyes away from the horrific scene unfolding before them. They held each other as they screamed and screamed. Panic coursed through Andrea's veins. Chris struggled beneath the bear, trying to fend it off, but his attempts were weak. His brain couldn't override the pain and the fear. And then the beast bit down on his shoulder, its powerful jaws crushing bone and muscle. Chris's vision blurred from the pain, but he knew he had to keep fighting. He kicked and thrashed, trying to push the bear away, but it was like trying to move a mountain. The bear roared, a deep, guttural sound that sent shivers down Andrea's spine. Finally, the woman managed to get the bear spray ready. She stumbled a couple of steps toward the bear, then aimed the spray at the bear's face and pressed the trigger. The effects were immediate. The bear flinched and backed away slightly, but instead of retreating, the bear turned its attention to Andrea. In a heartbeat, it lunged at her, swatting the bear spray out of her hand and knocking her to the ground. Andrea hit the ground hard. She tried to crawl away, but the bear grabbed her leg, dragging her back towards it. Andrea screamed, kicking frantically, but the bear sank its teeth into her thigh, the pain so intense that the woman thought she might pass out. She could hear the kids screaming, begging the bear to stop, but it was like they were miles away, their voices barely registering in her mind. Mary, Laura, and Tommy watched in horror as the bear attacked Andrea. They knew they had to do something, but they were paralyzed with fear. Laura, being the oldest, realized she was the only one who could help. She reluctantly let go of the younger kids and grabbed the bear spray that Andrea had dropped. Laura shakily aimed it at the bear, spraying it again and again. But the bear was more enraged than scared. It kept attacking, its jaws and claws tearing into Andrea, who was now barely conscious, her screams fading into weak, pained gasps. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, the sound of alarmed voices and footsteps came crashing through the trees. Laura saw 4 people rushing to their aid. They acted quickly, shouting and waving their arms, trying to distract the bear. One of them, an older man with a hiking pole, struck the bear on its back, while another hiker sprayed the bear with their own bear spray. The combined efforts finally drove the bear back. Chris and Andrea were both gravely injured, their bodies covered in deep gashes and bleeding bite marks. The kids were in shock, trembling and crying as they clung to each other. One of the hikers, who had medical training, quickly applied first aid, trying to stop the bleeding, while another called for help. Within minutes, the sound of a helicopter could be heard in the distance. The park rangers had been alerted and were on their way. The family was airlifted to a hospital where both Chris and Andrea underwent emergency surgery. The doctors were able to stabilize them, but the road to recovery was going to be a long one. The attack left deep scars on the Johnson family, both physically and emotionally. It was a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of the wilderness and the ever-present danger that grizzly bears pose in Glacier National Park. On August 8, 2024, Kodiak's harbor buzzed with gulls and boats, while inside the police station, Officer Silvera "Sil" Trent sorted reports at her desk. A decade on the force had shaped her from patrol officer into a respected investigator, admired for precision, calm under pressure, and quiet reliability. To colleagues, she was the steady core of the station. Yet that warm summer afternoon, amid shuffling papers and clicking keyboards, an unseen danger drew nearer than anyone could have expected. Behind the station, a large male Kodiak bear wandered near the service lot. The animal had been drawn from the dense forest by the strong smell of food left unsecured after a recent delivery. For days, it had roamed on the edges of town, growing bolder with each passing hour. Its size was immense, its body towering over cars and dumpsters, with a heavy coat that glistened in the sunlight. The hunger that drove it forward was relentless, and its path led it directly toward the station, a place thought to be safe from such wild threats. Without hesitation, the beast smashed through a side entrance, the wooden frame and thin door crumbling beneath its weight. The sudden crash sent a shock through the building. Filing cabinets toppled to the ground, spilling folders and scattering papers like leaves in the wind. Desks rattled, glass cracked, and the air filled with the thunderous sound of claws scraping against hard surfaces. Sil, caught only a few steps from the chaos, tried to retreat, but the giant bear's speed was unmatched. With one brutal surge, it lunged across the room and slammed her against a cold steel desk. Pain tore through her body as claws ripped deep across her shoulder and chest, leaving long red trails that cut through her uniform. The crushing weight drove into her ribs, snapping bone and forcing the air from her lungs. Blood poured freely as Sil fought to crawl beneath the desk, every breath shallow and sharp. She clutched the floor, her strength fading while the animal continued its rampage. Around her, the sound of shattering glass filled the station as the bear struck at windows and clawed through scattered files. Growls rumbled through the room, low and terrifying, shaking those who had taken cover. Several officers locked themselves in nearby rooms, their hearts pounding as they listened to the destruction spreading through the building. The sense of safety that once surrounded the station dissolved in an instant, replaced by panic and fear. The beast pressed forward, tearing through walls and scattering fragments of paperwork, its roar echoing louder than the alarms that now blared. Each second stretched long as Sil bled beneath the desk, trapped between survival and collapse. The station, meant to be a place of order, had become a scene of chaos under the power of an unstoppable predator. The beast's rage seemed endless as the alarms blared and the smell of blood filled the station. Papers floated through the air while shattered glass littered the floor, catching the harsh glow of the emergency lights. Beneath the desk, Officer Silvera Trent clung to life, her breath shallow and her uniform soaked in red. Every second felt stretched as the animal stomped and tore at the office, forcing furniture to collapse under its weight. The sound of claws on metal and wood echoed through the narrow halls, leaving those hidden in nearby rooms frozen in fear. Outside, the disturbance reached the ears of the tactical team stationed only a few blocks away. Trained for critical threats, they rushed toward the chaos, their vehicles cutting through traffic with sirens wailing. As they arrived, the ground seemed to vibrate with the heavy steps of the giant creature. It had already destroyed cabinets, walls, and stacks of reports, leaving the building in ruins. The officers inside dared not move, terrified that any sound would draw the beast's fury closer to them. The tactical group moved quickly, setting up a perimeter and loading weapons not meant to kill but to frighten. Flares were fired, the bursts of light filling the air with smoke and sparks. The loud cracks of warning fire reverberated against the walls of the station, startling the bear. The animal roared, spinning toward the noise, its eyes glowing in the dim emergency light. For tense minutes, it seemed ready to charge again, but the bright bursts of flame and acrid spray forced it to stumble back. Growls rumbled deep in its chest as it finally retreated through the same side entrance it had destroyed upon arrival. When the danger cleared, silence fell heavy across the station. Desks were overturned, broken glass spread like ice across the ground, and papers hung half-burned from sparks. Officers slowly emerged from their barricades, their faces pale and their uniforms torn from diving to cover. Beneath the wreckage, Syl lay motionless, her body broken but alive. Blood loss had weakened her. Her chest rose only slightly with every breath. Emergency workers rushed to her side, lifting her carefully onto a stretcher. Sirens cut through the night air once again as she was rushed to the hospital. Surgeons worked for hours to repair the torn tissue in her chest and shoulder, stabilizing her breathing and treating the fractured ribs. The road to recovery would be long, filled with pain and rehabilitation. Her strength, once trusted by so many in the community, now had to be rebuilt one step at a time. The aftermath left more than just physical scars. The station itself bore deep marks of the encounter, walls clawed apart and furniture destroyed. Officers carried the memory of the helplessness they felt as their workplace turned into a battlefield. For the town of Kodiak, the attack served as a grim reminder that even concrete walls and locked doors could not guarantee safety when carelessness left food unsecured. The lesson lingered heavily in the minds of all who witnessed the destruction, a reminder of the raw force of nature that shared their land. In March 2018, a team of scientists had set up a remote research station on the edge of a rapidly melting ice field in the Arctic. They were studying the impacts of climate change on this fragile environment, gathering data that would help the world understand the alarming changes taking place. The team consisted of experts from various fields, climatologists, marine biologists, and glaciologists, all united by a common goal: to raise awareness about the looming threats to the planet. They all loved the Arctic, a place of brutal beauty and cold where the sun barely rises during the winter and never sets in the summer. It's a region dominated by ice and snow, with temperatures that can plunge to deadly lows. The wildlife, including the majestic polar bear, has adapted to this harsh environment over millennia. However, as the ice recedes and their hunting grounds shrink, polar bears are being forced closer to human activity in search of food. The scientists' research station was designed to withstand the extreme conditions of the Arctic and even the dangers posed by polar bears. It was a small structure, reinforced to withstand the weight of snow and the force of Arctic winds. The station was equipped with high fences, bear-proof barriers, and alarm systems designed to alert the team to any approaching wildlife, particularly polar bears. They all knew the risks and didn't want to take any chances. There was even an armed guard at the station. The team took safety issues seriously and had drilled for every scenario, but nothing could truly prepare them for what was about to unfold. On this particular day, the team was focused on their work, oblivious to the lurking danger. Two scientists, Dr. Miller and Dr. Evans, were outside the station, collecting ice core samples and monitoring the instruments they had placed around the ice field. The rest of the team was inside, analyzing data and discussing their findings. It was a regular day. Everybody worked passionately. The Arctic was as silent as ever, with only the wind whipping across the ice and the distant crack of melting glaciers breaking the stillness, sounds the team had come to appreciate. As they worked, they were unaware they were about to come face to face with the effects of the melting ice. A polar bear, emaciated and driven by hunger as its traditional hunting grounds had all but disappeared, was circling the station as if deciding whether to attack or not. The thinning ice made it difficult for the bear to hunt seals, its primary food source, forcing it to venture closer to the research station. The bear, desperate and starving, saw the humans as potential prey. At some point during the afternoon, the bear decided to strike. As it charged, it moved with surprising speed for such a massive creature, crossing the ice with long, powerful strides. The alarms at the station blared, but it was too late. Dr. Miller, who was taking ice samples and was closest to the station, saw the bear at the last moment. He shouted a warning, but the bear closed the distance in mere seconds. Evans turned just in time to see the bear lunging at him. The sheer force of the impact knocked him to the ground. His scream cut short as the bear's claws raked across his back. As the bear bit down on Dr. Evans's shoulder, dragging him away from the station, red blood stained the blinding white ground. Dr. Miller, paralyzed by shock for a split second, sprang into action, grabbing the nearest flare gun and firing it at the bear. The flare hissed through the air, landing near the bear, but it was undeterred, focused entirely on its prey. Dr. Evans. Inside the station, the team erupted into chaos as they realized what was happening. They grabbed whatever weapons they could find, flare guns, signal horns, anything to scare the bear off. The armed guard, trained for such emergencies, rushed outside with his rifle, firing warning shots into the air. But there was nothing that could stop the bear. It ignored the noise and the flashes of light. Even more, instead of letting go, it tightened its grip on Dr. Evans, dragging him further across the ice. Miller, not willing to abandon his colleague, ran after the bear, shouting and firing another flare. The bear paused for a moment, snarling at the approaching humans. Its eyes, wild and desperate, locked onto Dr. Miller, who stood his ground, heart pounding in his chest. The bear dropped Dr. Evans, who lay motionless on the ice, and began advancing on Dr. Miller. In a flash, Dr. Miller was on the ground, and the bear was biting down on his right thigh. It shredded the layers of skin and flesh and shook Dr. Miller as if the man was a rag doll. As the bear attacked Dr. Miller, the guard took aim, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He fired a shot that struck the bear in the side. The bear roared in pain but continued its approach, now more furious than ever. The guard fired again, this time hitting the bear in the chest. The bear staggered, blood matting its white fur, and finally retreated, limping away into the distance. The team rushed to Dr. Evans and Dr. Miller. It was clear that their injuries were severe, but it was Dr. Evans that was dying. As some of the scientists worked to stop Dr. Miller's bleeding, others cradled Dr. Evans, trying to help, but the damage was too great. Dr. Evans's breaths were shallow, and his eyes were glazed over. He died in his colleagues' arms, his life slipping away in the cold, unforgiving expanse of the Arctic. The bear was gone, but the danger it had brought with it lingered. The attack had left the team shaken and terrified. With one scientist dead and another critically injured, they knew they couldn't stay. The research station, which had been their home and their hope for so long, was now a place of horror. They gathered their equipment and prepared to evacuate while Dr. Miller was taken to the nearest hospital. Their mission was cut short by the brutal reality of life in the Arctic. Polar bears, driven by hunger and desperation, were becoming more aggressive. The team's research was vital, but it came at a cost that was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. In May 2024, Rachel Thompson was a seasoned hiker and outdoor enthusiast, recognized among her friends for her love of nature and the joy of discovering new trails. At 32 years old, she had already completed some of the most difficult walks in the western United States, and her sights were now set on California's Sierra Nevada mountains. The Sierra Nevada, which spanned 400 miles and boasted some of the most breathtaking scenery in the country, was a sight of immense beauty. It was also home to a wide variety of species, including the enigmatic and frequently misunderstood black bear. On May 28, 2024, Rachel embarked on a solo hike along one of the Sierra Nevada's most popular trails, famed for its spectacular views. The route was difficult, but Rachel enjoyed the isolation and connection with nature that it provided, and she even enjoyed the physical strain. She had been planning this journey for months, researching the terrain, packing appropriate supplies, and preparing for any potential wildlife encounters. As Rachel traveled farther into the forest, the towering pines and firs cast long shadows across the trail, and the only sounds were the crunch of her feet on the ground and the occasional bird's call. She felt at ease, engrossed in the beauty of the scenery surrounding her. But as she rounded a bend in the trail, everything changed in an instant. Rachel unintentionally crossed paths with a huge black bear. The bear, who may have been guarding a food source or cubs hidden nearby, became suddenly alert. Its empty gaze fixed on Rachel, and the calmness of the wilderness transformed into a scene of terror. The bear's posture changed, its ears flattened, and it gave a low, dangerous growl. Rachel froze, her heart thumping in her chest, realizing she was in grave danger. She was aware of the advice, "Don't run, don't turn your back," and appear non-threatening. Rachel began to back away gradually, keeping an eye on the bear, hoping it would lose interest and disappear into the forest. However, the bear had already made up its mind. It charged at Rachel with unexpected and terrifying speed. Panic overtook her as the bear closed the gap in seconds, its huge bulk barreling towards her. Rachel went for the bear spray attached to her bag, fumbling to get it ready. Before she could react, the bear was on her, knocking her down with a strong sweep of its paw. Rachel was desperate to defend herself. She got the bear spray out and pointed it at the bear's face, pressing the trigger. The spray hissed out, but the bear was too close and enraged. It roared in pain and fury as the spray hit its eyes, but it refused to back down. The bear attacked again, its claws digging into Rachel's calf, ripping through her hiking trousers and flesh. She screamed in anguish, her mind racing for an escape as the bear attacked relentlessly. Rachel, bloodied and bruised, attempted to crawl away, but the bear was not finished. It bit down on her arm, sending a blaze of pain through her body. Rachel's vision faded, and she felt her strength waning under the bear's attack. Just when she thought all hope was lost, she heard faint sounds that gradually grew stronger. Rachel's screaming drew a group of hikers to the scene of the attack. When they saw the horrible scene unfolding in front of them, they reacted swiftly. One of the hikers, a man in his 40s, took out his own canister of bear spray and pointed it at the bear. He discharged a tremendous stream right into the bear's face. This time, the bear backed away, snarling in agony and confusion. The other hikers shouted and raised their arms, making as much noise as possible to scare the bear away. The bear disappeared into the forest. The hikers rushed to Rachel's help. They bandaged her wounds and dialed emergency services. Within an hour, a rescue helicopter arrived, airlifting Rachel to the nearest hospital. The medical team worked tirelessly to treat her injuries, which were severe but not life-threatening. Rachel survived the attack, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would stay with her forever. Her story served as a reminder that nature's unpredictability can catch you off guard, no matter how well prepared you think you are. It was still, thick with the scent of damp earth and spruce in late July 2019. Clouds hung low over jagged ridgelines, and the mossy ground muffled every step like a thick green sponge. Mason Rowe moved carefully through the brush, his eyes scanning the terrain with quiet precision. At 43, he had spent more than 2 decades guiding deep into the rugged interior of a vast northern island, where the land was raw and untamed. Tall, lean, and quiet by nature, he had an instinct for reading the wild that came from years of solitude in country where mistakes could be fatal. That morning, Mason was guiding 2 clients from Oregon, Jason and Lyle, both in their 30s, eager for photographs and close encounters. They were in good shape and respectful of the land, but inexperienced. Mason had been firm in his instructions. Stay close, stay quiet, and don't get ahead of yourself. The valley they were in was remote, a broad swath of tundra edged by dense stands of alder and willow, a known corridor for bears. They had been following faint game trails all morning when Mason spotted it, a moose carcass partially buried in moss and leaf litter, only the hindquarters visible under a shallow mound of dirt and debris. The way it was stashed told him immediately what it meant: a bear kill, fresh, nearby. The kind of discovery that made even seasoned guides go still. He raised one hand to signal the men to stop, then slowly crouched down, studying the ground. The soil around the carcass had been disturbed recently. Large paw prints, deep and wide, led into the surrounding brush. The bear was close, far too close. Then everything happened at once. From the far side of the brush, without warning, the bear exploded from cover. It came in a blur of motion, fur rippling, muscles coiled beneath its massive frame, eyes fixed and full of silent purpose. A full-grown male, easily over 1,000 pounds, its brown fur was slick with moisture and darkened at the muzzle. It was not yet charging, but it was coming. Mason didn't shout or run. There was no time. He dropped flat onto the mossy tundra, arms outstretched, legs extended, his cheek pressed into the cold ground. Behind him, Jason and Lyle froze in place, too terrified to move. The wind carried the bear's heavy breathing and the snapping of branches as it circled, fast, just outside their line of sight. Then it arrived. The weight of the creature seemed to compress the air as it loomed directly over Mason. Its front paws were planted firmly just behind his legs. He felt the blast of heat from its breath against the back of his neck, damp, sour, and alive. His body remained motionless, limbs burning with tension, heart pounding against the earth. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. He simply waited. The bear didn't strike immediately. It stood over him, silent and poised. Then came the blow, not a killing strike, but a warning. One massive paw swiped across Mason's upper back. The claws sliced through his jacket and tore into the skin beneath, deep enough to sting, shallow enough to spare. Blood welled up immediately, warm and slow, soaking into the fabric. He clenched his teeth but didn't move. The bear exhaled heavily, a low sound, neither a growl nor a threat, then pulled back. Mason couldn't see it, but he sensed the pressure shift, felt the weight retreating. There was no noise of triumph or rage, only deliberate silence. After several moments, he heard the heavy footfalls moving away, back toward the half-buried carcass. Even when the sounds had faded into the trees, he remained still. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, he pushed himself up, gasping as a bolt of pain surged through his shoulder and neck. The wound wasn't fatal, but it burned with a deep, pulsing ache. He turned to check on the others. Both men were pale, rooted to the ground, their eyes wide with shock. Blood dripped steadily from Mason's back as he guided them quietly away from the site, taking a longer route through the brush to avoid disturbing the bear again. Only once they had crested the ridgeline and left the valley did he allow himself to sit down and breathe. Back at camp, the wound was cleaned and stitched with slow, methodical care. The gash crossed his shoulder blade in a sharp diagonal, angry and red, but clean. Jason offered to assist, but Mason declined. Lyle had questions, but Mason only gave a nod in response. He didn't describe the pain. He didn't speak of the fear. What lingered in his mind wasn't the roar of the bear or even the sting of its claws. It was the silence, the awful, deliberate stillness of a predator that had nothing to prove. It had known what it was doing. It had chosen not to kill. That night, Mason lay awake long after dark, staring at the ceiling of the canvas tent while the wind moved gently through the trees. The memory repeated itself in his mind. Not the instant of impact, but the moment before, the heavy presence behind him, the weight of something ancient and absolute. The bear had not acted in fear or anger. It had made a decision, and Mason had felt it. In the following days, he guided Jason and Lyle safely back to the pickup site. They were quiet now, no longer searching for drama or photographs. They asked for no more close encounters, and Mason offered no stories. They left the island quieter than they had arrived, carrying something deeper than snapshots. Once back in town, a doctor examined the wound and remarked that it was clean and fortunate. Mason only nodded. He didn't try to explain what it meant to lie under that weight and feel one's life weighed and tolerated. He simply left the clinic, carefully pulled his jacket over the stitches, and walked home in silence. The scar would remain, long after the wound healed, not as a trophy, not as a tale to impress, but as a reminder that in the heart of the wild, control was never yours. Survival was not a right. It was something granted. And sometimes, only barely. Night was thick with the scent of pine and wood smoke on June 27, 2023, as the dense canopy of the Carpathians pressed in from all sides. 5 tourists, young, eager, and unprepared, had camped illegally deep within a restricted forest zone. Warning signs posted about active bear territory had been disregarded, as had every established guideline on food storage and campsite safety. Rather than hang their supplies high and away from camp, they had left granola bars and vacuum-sealed meats inside backpacks stacked just outside their tents. They assumed their fire and group size would be enough to deter danger. The group had hiked in from logging roads the day prior, seeking solitude and adrenaline. They had pushed beyond marked trails to set up camp beside a narrow stream, well out of range of any patrol or ranger presence. By sundown, their laughter had echoed between the trees. By midnight, only the fire's last embers remained, casting faint orange flickers across the clearing. At 2:13 a.m., the forest stirred. A large brown bear, drawn by the faint aroma of dried fruit, oats, and smoked meat, entered the camp without a sound. It was an adult male, heavy-bodied and low to the ground, moving with a fluid ease that defied its massive size. At the edge of the clearing, it paused briefly, nostrils flaring, then stepped forward with deliberate quiet, its paws silent on the thick pine needle carpet. It found the backpacks first. With little effort, the bear tore through the nylon, pulling contents out with claws and teeth. Plastic wrappers crinkled, zippers gave way. A sealed pouch of meat disappeared into its mouth without chewing. Still, none of the campers woke. But when the bear turned toward the nearest tent, everything changed. The fabric shifted slightly as someone inside moved. Emilia, a 24-year-old student from Bucharest, stirred in her sleeping bag. Her breathing was slow and unaware until the tent wall beside her split open with a ripping sound. A claw slashed down her back with terrifying precision, slicing through canvas and skin alike. The pain hit instantly, and her scream pierced the night. A sharp, ragged cry that jolted the others awake. Blood sprayed across the interior of the tent as she thrashed. The bear, momentarily startled by the movement and noise, stepped back but didn't leave. It stood at the entrance, massive and unmoving, moonlight catching in its eyes, breath visible in the cool air. The other tents exploded in panic. One unzipped frantically, and a figure stumbled out, falling hard before crawling toward the dead fire. Another voice cried out, brief, incomprehensible, filled with raw fear. Inside her torn tent, Emilia's cries faded into gasps as she curled against the shredded lining of her sleeping bag. Blood soaked through the fabric and pooled beneath her. Christy, the eldest of the group at 31 and the only one with experience in the outdoors, grabbed the bear deterrent spray from his coat. He staggered toward her tent, struggling to remove the safety clip. The bear shifted slightly as the spray hissed, the orange cloud hitting its face. It recoiled with a grunt, blinking rapidly. Another camper, Mate, hurled a rock. It barely grazed the animal's shoulder. The bear paused. For one terrible moment, it simply stood at the center of the campsite, chest rising and falling, breath heavy. Saliva dripped from its jaw. Its eyes swept over the campers, not with fear, but calculation. Then, with no sound or signal, it turned back to Emilia's tent and lunged. Its claws tore another line through the fabric, just inches from where Emilia lay. The bear's snout pushed through the slit, sniffing the air, then pulled back. Without warning, it turned and walked away, slipping back into the trees as silently as it had come. Within seconds, the clearing was quiet again. The group stood motionless. Eventually, one of them rushed to Emilia's side. What they saw froze them in place. Her back was shredded. 4 long, deep gashes ran from shoulder to waist. The skin had peeled back in thick flaps, exposing raw tissue and muscle. Blood pooled around her hips. Her hands trembled as she tried to speak, but no sound came. Her eyes rolled back, and she slipped into unconsciousness before they could lift her. They acted quickly. A tarp was repurposed as a stretcher. 2 campers held her legs, the others her arms and shoulders. She moaned once as they raised her, faint, weak. The pain was unbearable, but unconsciousness gave her a small mercy. The hike back to safety should have taken 6 hours. It took 30. They lost the trail within the first hour, the moon hidden by thick clouds. Every step over the rugged forest floor jostled her body. Every stumble brought new panic. Christy led with a compass and memory alone, while the others rotated carrying the tarp, their arms cramping, hands freezing, minds growing numb with fear and fatigue. They had no GPS signal, no emergency beacon. Their medical supplies consisted of gauze pads and a shirt used to compress the wounds. Water was rationed. As the temperature dropped through the night, Emilia drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes whispering, sometimes vomiting from the pain. By the time a search and rescue team found them, her lips had turned blue and her skin was cold. A helicopter crew, deployed after a family member reported them missing, spotted them on the edge of a ravine. They were huddled together under a tree, shielding her body with their jackets. The rescue that followed was tense and immediate. A medic began fluid treatment and administered pain medication. Her heart rate was weak but stable. The rest of the group showed symptoms of shock, dehydration, and early hypothermia. Their account of the incident came slowly, through fragmented sentences and tearful, wide-eyed stares. Emilia survived. After undergoing multiple surgeries and enduring a long recovery, she regained partial mobility. The physical scars would remain, but her spine had been missed by a narrow margin. The others returned to their lives, deeply altered. They never gave interviews. They spoke rarely about what had happened. But when nightmares came or silence grew too deep, each remembered the same moment, the scream that echoed through the trees, and the image of the bear standing there, motionless and massive before it turned away. It hadn't retreated because it was afraid. It had simply decided it was done, and that, more than the pain or the blood, was the detail that remained burned in their memories. The canopy of a central Indian forest stretched endlessly over the dense ground below. Its mixture of teak, sal, and bamboo groves, thick with the heat of early summer. Dappled light filtered through the upper branches, casting long, shifting patterns as birds called overhead and insects stirred in the underbrush. It was June 21st, 2024. Arjun, a forest ranger with over 20 years of experience patrolling this rugged terrain, moved with the quiet certainty of a man who knew every bend and slope of the wilderness by heart. But that day, his steps were slower than usual, not from age or fatigue, but because his teenage son Kavi was walking just behind him, uncertain in his footing and more accustomed to city life than to the wild that surrounded them on all sides. This was not an official patrol. Arjun had taken leave in hopes of bridging a growing silence between them, a distance that had expanded in recent years as Kavi grew older, more withdrawn, less impressed by the forests that had once defined his father's identity, and more absorbed in a world of screens and digital distraction. Arjun had hoped the day might shift something between them. They had been walking for nearly 2 hours beneath the dense shade of towering trees, following narrow animal trails and listening to the rhythm of the forest, when a sudden rustle, heavy, low, and dangerously close, shattered the calm like a pane of glass breaking under pressure. The explosion of movement that followed was almost too fast to process. A sloth bear, thick with coarse black fur and wild-eyed with protective instinct, burst out from the underbrush not 10 feet away. Her roar echoed through the trees, her entire body bristling with the unthinking violence only a mother guarding unseen cubs could unleash. Arjun's reflexes, sharpened by decades in the field, kicked in instantly. He raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air, the sound cracking through the forest. But the bear was already upon them before the echo had faded. She struck him first, slamming into his side with enough force to knock the air from his lungs and send him crashing onto the hard-packed earth. Her jaws locked onto his thigh with brutal strength, tearing through flesh and muscle with a sickening crunch that ignited a blinding surge of pain. Arjun struggled to lift the butt of the rifle to fend her off, but before he could manage, she turned on Kavi, who had barely moved, striking out with a massive paw and raking it across the boy's shoulder and back. 3 long claws tore through cloth and skin alike, carving deep red furrows. Then, just as quickly as she had come, the bear vanished. She retreated into the undergrowth with a final crash of foliage, taking her cubs and fury with her, and leaving behind only blood, silence, and the sound of 2 people gasping in pain and shock. Arjun lay still for a moment, his leg a column of agony, before forcing himself upright with a ragged breath. Stripping off his shirt with shaking hands, he tore it into makeshift bandages. One strip he wrapped tightly around his leg, tying it above the wound to stem the bleeding. Then he turned to Kavi, whose face was pale and eyes wide with disbelief. The boy remained silent, neither crying nor speaking. There was no time for panic, no room for hesitation or grief. Help was hours away, and they needed to move immediately. The nearest ranger station lay 8 miles to the east, and every step between them and safety would be a test of endurance, a race against blood loss, infection, and the oppressive heat of the jungle. Arjun clenched his jaw against the pain, stood with difficulty on one leg and pulled Kavi upright. He wrapped an arm around the boy's shoulders, urging him forward. Each step sent fresh waves of fire through his leg, making the ground sway beneath him. They moved, slowly, agonizingly, across dried leaves and brittle earth, leaning on each other, neither one able to walk alone. Somehow they managed to stay upright, making their way deeper into the forest's hush, where even the birds seemed to quiet in uneasy awareness of the blood trailing behind them. The pain never faded. It gnawed at Arjun constantly, but he buried it beneath sheer willpower, focused solely on distance and direction, on keeping Kavi walking, on not collapsing before they reached help. Hours passed. The sun hung high overhead, baking the canopy. They lost the trail more than once, doubling back through bramble thickets that shredded their clothing and left welts on their arms. The forest seemed to blur around them, the steady hum of insects rising as exhaustion dulled their senses. Kavi trembled frequently, but remained silent. Arjun, teeth clenched and vision clouded with sweat, refused to slow down more than a breath. When they finally stumbled into the clearing near the ranger station, the sky had begun to darken with the promise of evening rain. The guards spotted them from the tower and rushed forward, their expressions shifting instantly from routine vigilance to horror. Medics moved fast. Arjun lost consciousness before his stretcher hit the floor. Kavi, still silent, allowed himself to be lifted and treated. His wounds were deep but clean. Blood had dried in thick lines across his back, where 3 perfect gashes would leave lasting scars. Arjun would survive, though the damage to his leg was permanent. Torn muscle, nerve trauma, and limited mobility would leave him with a pronounced limp, but he refused to let the injury end his service. Kavi, stitched and carefully bandaged, would carry his own scars into adulthood, a visible memory that would never fully fade. Later, when rangers returned to the site, they retrieved footage from a nearby camera trap, grainy black and white images of the same bear, walking calmly through the undergrowth with 2 cubs following closely. She paused briefly, sniffing the air, then continued into the deeper jungle. There was no aggression in her posture, no sign of lingering agitation. She did not return to the area, and no further conflict occurred. Arjun never admitted how close he had come to giving up in those hours after the attack, how badly he had wanted to collapse, to stop moving, to let the forest close over him. But Kavi did. When he finally spoke about the incident, it was with a quiet clarity that surprised everyone. He described the silence, the unbearable weight of his father's arm across his shoulders, and the sense that every step forward was more than survival. It was transformation. The bear left them marked, not only by claw or blood, but by something more enduring. Pain had carved understanding between them. And in that long walk out of the jungle, they discovered what words had failed to express for years, that survival, shared in silence, could heal what time and distance could not. The morning air was heavy with humidity on May 15th, 2025, thick and damp in the southern mountain range. The sun barely pierced through the dense canopy of oak and hemlock, which stretched outward in seemingly endless layers of green shadow. At that moment, Leo Simmons clipped into the harness of the zipline, his hands firm but slightly trembling from the familiar rush of adrenaline that always accompanied high-speed adventure. The forest stretched below him like an ocean of foliage, a swirling mosaic of deep green, dark shadow, and flickering bursts of movement where sunlight broke through the leaves. The scent of wet earth rose upward, mingling with the lingering smoke of distant campfires. When he pushed off from the wooden platform, the world seemed to drop away, and he was suddenly suspended above the rugged, undulating terrain, gliding swiftly through the cool air. His heart raced not merely from the thrill of speed, but from the knowledge that this wilderness was alive with unpredictability. The mountains breathed with a hidden rhythm, and every rustle in the undergrowth carried the possibility of something powerful and dangerous. The exhilaration of the ride merged with the sobering awareness that this forest could transform an ordinary thrill into a life-or-death struggle without warning. Leo's eyes scanned instinctively as he traveled along the taut cable, sweeping over the shifting floor of leaves and ferns far below. That was when he noticed the movement. Among the ferns and branches, a shadow shifted. large and deliberate. At first he thought it might be nothing more than a trick of light, but his gaze caught the outline clearly. A dark, hulking figure crouched near discarded picnic baskets left behind by careless visitors over the previous weekend. A black bear moved through the debris, its thick coat mottled with dust and bits of packaging, the faint remnants of scavenged food clinging to its fur. Even from above, Leo could sense the raw weight and energy coiled within its body. He silently wished the animal would remain oblivious to his passage, but instinct prickled at the back of his neck. This was no idle encounter. The forest seldom forgave carelessness. As his momentum slowed, Leo extended his feet toward the wooden platform. The harness groaned as the line settled, and the structure beneath him creaked when he landed. In that instant, the bear's head snapped upward, its dark eyes fixed on him with a sharp intensity that drained the air from his lungs. His stomach tightened, as if gripped in a fist. Before he could steady himself, the animal surged forward with a speed that defied its size. It closed the distance to the platform in seconds, massive forelegs outstretched, claws tearing into the boards. One swipe raked across Leo's arms and legs. The pain was immediate and searing, streaks of fire lancing through his skin as blood welled in ragged ribbons. The metallic tang filled the air, sharp and overwhelming, as adrenaline sharpened every detail of the moment. Stumbling backward, Leo slammed against the edge of the platform. His backpack swung into his grasp, transformed into a feeble barrier against the raw power of the predator. He swung it wildly, desperate to shield himself. Each kick he delivered forced the animal to shift slightly, but nothing in his efforts broke the determination of the bear, whose muscles rippled with feral intent. The platform groaned beneath their combined weight. Each impact reverberated through the beams, echoing like muffled thunder beneath his feet. The animal lunged again, jaws snapping dangerously close to his torso, the hot breath carrying the musk of the wild. Every movement was a blur, too fast and too close. A storm of claws and teeth on timber no wider than a small room. Leo twisted and pivoted, throwing himself against a support beam, using the structure to leverage himself away from the deadly reach of the bear. Time fractured into slow, stretching fragments, each second an eternity where survival hung by the thinnest margin. From the shadowed tree line, a new figure appeared, Ranger Morgan Hayes. He carried a thick metal pole, moving with deliberate urgency, each step punctuated by forceful shouts designed to redirect the animal's focus. The bear paused, ears twitching, gaze flickering between its target and the newcomer. The hesitation was slight but vital. Morgan brought the pole down hard against the wooden platform. The blow rang out like a crack of thunder, the vibrations rushing outward through the boards and upward into the canopy. The sudden sound startled the bear, forcing its body to recoil, muscles coiling in wary confusion. Its instincts pressed it to advance, yet its caution tugged it backward, caught between curiosity and alarm. With another deafening clash, the ranger drove the point home. The echo rippled through the trees, resonant and sharp. The black bear hesitated, its posture shifting from aggression to wariness, and at last, with one final glance over its shoulder, it bounded into the forest's tangled shadows. Branches snapped beneath its weight, and in moments it was gone, leaving only the echoes of its claws on the boards and the lingering musk of its presence. Leo collapsed onto the platform, his body trembling with violent aftershocks. Blood ran freely from the long gashes across his arms and legs. His fingers slipped over the slick skin as he tried to assess the damage. Jagged tears, swelling flesh, searing pain. His breath came in ragged bursts, and as the adrenaline drained, the trembling grew worse. The line between controlled adventure and mortal danger had dissolved entirely, replaced by a raw confrontation with untamed nature. Ranger Hayes crouched beside him, working quickly to slow the bleeding. Gauze pressed into wounds, steady hands wrapping bandages in tight spirals. Leo's mind, however, replayed the encounter in relentless detail. The head turning, the first swipe of claws, the sharp heat of pain tearing across his limbs, the snapping jaws inches from his torso, the desperate swing of his backpack, the futile kicks against unrelenting power. Each memory etched itself deeply, a permanent reminder of how narrow the gap was between ordinary thrill and disaster. The forest, moments ago a landscape of beauty and exhilaration, now pulsed with menace in his imagination. Every shadow seemed capable of hiding claws. Every rustle carried the weight of unseen danger. His survival, he realized, had not come from skill alone. It had been reflex, timing, and the intervention of another human who had known when and how to act. By the time paramedics arrived, the adrenaline had completely faded, leaving exhaustion like lead in his veins. Each cut throbbed with fresh waves of pain. Every shiver was a reminder of how fragile the illusion of safety could be. They guided him carefully down the winding trails to the ranger station, the forest pressing close on all sides, each sound magnified in his heightened state. Others would come, Leo knew. Visitors would ride the same ziplines, stepping off with the same thrill in their eyes, unaware of what had happened here. To them, the mountains would remain an exhilarating playground suspended high above the earth. But to him, the memory would remain, carved into flesh and mind alike. The wilderness did not forgive mistakes. That day had transformed from a simple adventure into an encounter with the elemental truth of the natural world. Beauty and danger were inseparable, and survival often depended on nothing more than a heartbeat, a reflex, and a measure of fortune. On July 7, 2025, three friends biked through Yellowstone's shadowed backcountry trails. Liam Carter, fearless and daring, pushed every jump. Ava Ramirez, a strong university athlete, kept the group balanced. Ethan Kim, quiet but skilled, carried his camera to capture wildlife. Their friendship was built on countless adventures, often along hidden paths away from crowded parks. This summer ride promised laughter, speed, and memory-making, until the dense forest revealed a force far more powerful than any trail they had ever faced. As the sun climbed higher, light pierced the trees in broken rays, catching the spray of dirt and pine needles beneath their tires. The group pressed deeper into the wild, weaving between thick trunks and sharp bends, chasing thrills with every jump and skid. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, and silence filled the spaces between their tires as they scraped against the stone. But beneath that stillness, hidden behind layers of brush, a heavy presence stirred. A massive grizzly, restless from the season and fiercely protective, watched the riders draw near. In an instant, that silence was shattered as the great beast exploded from the shadows, its body a wall of fur and fury, charging with unstoppable force. Liam was midair, balanced on a log ramp, his wheel lifting in a sharp trick when the bear's claws struck him mid-flight. He was flung sideways into a jagged boulder, the impact snapping through his body as claws raked across his shoulder and arm, tearing deep lines of pain. His bike clattered away, its frame twisted against stone. The sudden attack was as fast as a lightning strike, leaving no room to think, only to endure. Ava, only feet behind, reacted on instinct, steering her bike directly toward the chaos, hoping to draw the fury away. The Grizzly swiped once, its power sending her tumbling headlong down a steep slope. Her body hit hard, a rib crushed beneath her, skin torn by sharp branches that carved deep gashes across her back. Ethan, thrown into panic, tried to turn sharply, his tires skidding over a slick route. He barely managed to stay upright, only to feel the bear's massive weight slam him against a fallen tree. Its paws raked his legs and torso, tearing through fabric and flesh, pinning him in place like prey. Their bikes were scattered, their wheels bent, helmets cracked. The trail itself was marked with the violence of the attack. The forest filled with screams, raw cries for help, echoing through the high canopy as the grizzly towered over its victims. The wilderness that had moments before felt alive with joy now throbbed with danger, each second dragging into eternity as the bear's rage held them trapped in a nightmare. The terror had only just begun, and the fate of the three riders now hung in a fragile balance between survival and the untamed wrath of Yellowstone's most feared predator. The screams that tore through Yellowstone's backcountry still echoed when the desperate sound of rescue finally cut through the chaos. The sharp blasts of ranger flares cracked the air, their glow streaking red against the trees, while the heavy spray of deterrent mist rolled through the brush. The great bear, startled by the sudden burn in its eyes and nose, hesitated for a moment before retreating deeper into the forest. Its massive form vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of broken branches, bent bikes, and the battered bodies of three riders who had faced its full wrath. The silence that followed was heavy and strange, as if the woods themselves were catching their breath after the storm. Rangers rushed forward, pulling Liam away from the sharp rocks where blood soaked his torn gear. His shoulder hung in shreds, and his arm lay limp, but he was alive, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. Ava was next, dragged up from the slope where she had landed among splintered branches. Her rib was fractured, her back carved with deep wounds, yet she clung to consciousness, her eyes fixed on the rescuers as they wrapped her tightly to stop the flow of red. Ethan, pinned against the fallen tree, struggled to move his legs, both marked by the long rake of claws. He was lifted gently onto a stretcher, his face pale, his lips pressed thin in pain, but still aware of his friends' cries around him. The aftermath of the attack spread across the trail like a grim painting. Twisted bicycles lay in heaps, wheels bent at unnatural angles, helmets cracked down the center, their packs were scattered, contents spilling into the mud. Branches snapped under boots as the rescuers moved quickly, working to stabilize all three. The ground bore deep claw marks, scars left by the power of an animal defending its place in the wilderness. Every detail spoke to the sudden and unforgiving nature of the wild when humans and beasts collided without warning. Hours later, as helicopters thumped overhead, the three injured riders were lifted into the sky, carried toward hospitals beyond the trees. The forest below seemed unchanged, its vast green canopy stretching on, but for those who had survived, nothing would ever look the same again. Their bodies carried scars that would heal slowly, but their memories would hold the sharp truth of how close they had come to death. Their survival was not just a story of rescue, but a reminder of how nature, untamed and raw, could strike without mercy. In the weeks that followed, news of the mauling spread far beyond the park. Families wept, friends gathered, and the images of shredded gear and bloodied bikes shook communities. Rangers spoke openly about how wildfires, changing seasons, and human activity were prompting bears to engage in more dangerous encounters. Yellowstone remained beautiful, but the shadow of what had happened hung heavy over its trails. Liam, Ava, and Ethan had survived, yet the mark of that day in July would live with them, as permanent as the scars etched across their skin. On July 14th, 2023, the volcanic valleys of Kamchatka stretched wide under a gray sky, their rocky slopes dotted with patches of snow and streams of meltwater winding between jagged ridges. Ivan Petrov walked steadily at the front of the group, his boots leaving careful marks on the uneven ground. Known in the region as a seasoned guide, he had spent most of his adult life leading travelers through landscapes both stunning and unforgiving. He grew up near the mountains, where wild winds swept across plains, and the sight of bears in the distance was common. Over the years, he developed a keen sense of reading the land, spotting signs of movement, and keeping hikers safe. He carried with him stories of eruptions, storms, and the raw strength of wildlife, which inspired both awe and caution in visitors. On this day, his experience and instinct were tested most harshly. The group followed him closely, taking in the striking view of lava fields and lush green valleys. Ivan checked their footing as the path narrowed, guiding them carefully past sharp stones and slippery soil. The ground trembled suddenly, and loose rocks broke free from the cliff above. A sharp rumble rolled across the valley, scattering small birds into the air. From the shadows of the slope, a massive brown bear erupted into sight, its fur bristling and its eyes wide with alarm. The animal had been resting when the noise startled it, and in its panic, it charged toward the group. Ivan reacted instantly. He saw two hikers frozen in place, their faces pale with fear. Without hesitation, he threw his body against them, shoving them aside before the rushing weight of the predator reached them. But his brave act left him exposed. The bear's bulk slammed into him, forcing him against the sharp edge of a boulder with crushing force. Pain shot through him as claws ripped across his torso and legs, tearing fabric and skin. The impact cracked ribs, and his breath came in jagged bursts as blood spread quickly across his jacket. He tried to resist, pushing at the heavy shoulders of the beast, but the animal swiped again, dragging him down into the rocks. His cries echoed across the valley as the bear's claws punctured deeper, grinding him into the jagged ground. The hikers stood in shock, torn between flight and the desperate need to help. Fear overwhelmed most, and one bolted down the path in search of help. Others stayed rooted in horror as the predator hovered above its fallen target, growling low and circling. Ivan's strength faded as the minutes stretched, and the stones beneath him darkened with spreading red. The valley's silence returned, broken only by the heavy breaths of the beast and the cries of those who witnessed. The ground, once only marked by footsteps, was now scarred by the violent struggle between man and nature. In that place, where volcanoes carved the earth and wildlife ruled, the fight for survival became painfully clear, and the danger that lurked in Kamchatka revealed itself in full force. The valley was quiet when the predator finally slowed its movements, circling the fallen guide with heavy breaths that stirred dust across the sharp ground. Ivan Petrov's body lay broken against the stone, his chest rising and falling in a weak rhythm, until the flow of blood overtook what strength he had left. The hikers who had been pushed away stood in shock, their faces pale, their limbs frozen between terror and grief. Some backed further along the trail, stumbling over loose gravel, while others remained fixed, unable to look away from the scene. The bear lingered, sniffing at the air, its fur streaked with dirt, its ears twitching at every small sound in the valley. For long moments the group felt trapped in a silence filled only by the low growl of the beast and the cries of the wounded man fading into stillness. One traveler, trembling with fear, forced himself to run down the uneven path, desperate to find help before the creature returned to strike again. Each step sent echoes bouncing against the cliffs as he vanished into the distance, leaving the others huddled together in dread. Minutes stretched like hours. The bear's massive body shifted from rock to rock, circling with slow intent, before it turned and retreated into the slopes, vanishing into the brush as quickly as it had arrived. Relief washed over the remaining hikers, but it was thin and brief, for the damage had already been done. The people crept back toward the boulder, their hearts heavy as they saw the lifeless form of the man who had shielded them. His jacket was soaked in red, his hands still curled in the dirt where he had tried to fight. Their voices shook with sorrow, yet they knew they had no power left to change what had happened. The valley around them, once a place of wonder, now felt like a graveyard of echoes, carrying the memory of a fight that ended in loss. With trembling arms, they tried to cover the guide with what spare fabric they had, giving him a final gesture of respect as the cold mountain air drifted across the slope. When the first signs of rescue appeared on the horizon, it was already too late. The team arrived with urgency, their boots striking the ground quickly, their packs heavy with medical gear, yet their faces hardened when they saw the still form on the rocks. They secured the group, checked injuries, and scanned the path for any sign of the beast. But the danger had already moved deeper into the wild. Their radios crackled with reports, carrying the weight of a loss that words could barely hold. The body was lifted carefully, and the valley was left silent once again, save for the distant call of birds returning to the cliffs. News spread quickly across the region. Villagers spoke of the guide's courage, recounting how he had placed others before himself when death seemed imminent. His name carried through towns and camps, remembered not only for his skill, but also for his sacrifice. The attack became a warning carved into memory, a story told with heavy voices about how sudden violence can rise from the quiet of the mountains. For those who walk that land again, the shadow of that day remained, a reminder that the wilderness does not bend, and that respect for its power is written in lives lost. August 12th, 2024, and a group of 10 people, tourists and locals alike, gathered outside in the remote settlement of Longyearbyen, Svalbard, Norway, to enjoy the breathtaking Arctic landscape. Out of the 10 people, 4 were tourists. They had chosen to visit the remote settlement, drawn by the allure of the midnight sun and the unique beauty of the polar environment. The other people, 5 locals, not only found solace in the stark, icy wilderness surrounding their small community, but they also loved to share the land's beauty with outsiders. But what was supposed to be a moment of quiet joy and wonder turned into a living nightmare. Longyearbyen, a settlement of around 2,500 residents, is the world's northernmost town. The town is located in the Svalbard archipelago, just over 800 miles from the North Pole. It's a place where nature reigns supreme, its raw power completely untouched by humans. Its towering mountains, endless glaciers, and the ever-present danger of polar bears attract the bravest souls from all over the world. This particular group of tourists was no different. They were all thrill-seekers who had explored the most secluded corners of the earth, and Longyearbyen had long been on their bucket lists. The group had ventured out that evening to experience the Arctic twilight. The sun was casting a surreal golden glow across the icy landscape. It was a beautiful sight, but also one that made the group realize just how secluded the place was. They were just a short distance from the town's outskirts, but even the safety of the buildings couldn't compete with the untamed wilderness. All 9 members of the group were armed with cameras, binoculars, and a sense of adventure, eager to explore the otherworldly beauty of the Arctic. They were blissfully unaware of the immense danger lurking in the shadows. A large and starving polar bear had been stalking the area for days. The lack of natural prey in the region had driven the bear further from the ice and its natural habitat, and closer to human settlements in search of food. The bear's natural habitat has taken a huge hit in recent years due to the abrupt effects of climate change. The sea ice that once provided a hunting ground for seals, the bear's primary prey, had been receding at an alarming rate, forcing the bears to venture further inland where food was scarce. And if seals were no longer an option, humans would have to suffice. This particular bear, a large male, had been spotted near Longyearbyen before, but it had always kept its distance. This time, however, its hunger was bottomless. It had made the bear more aggressive, more willing to take risks. The bear was dangerously thin, its ribs visible beneath its fur, and its eyes had the wild, desperate look of an animal that had been driven to the brink. The group had just finished taking photos of the landscape when one of the locals, a hunter named Eric, noticed something moving in the distance. Eric didn't want to alarm the others and waited to be sure of what he was seeing. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light or a shadow cast by the setting sun. But then the shape grew closer and larger. It was then that, to his horror, Eric realized that it was a polar bear, and it was heading straight for them. The hunter shouted a warning, but the others were too mesmerized by the landscape to notice the approaching danger. It was as if they were under a spell. In an instant, before anyone could react, the bear was upon them. It moved with terrifying speed, driven by nothing but hunger. The first to fall was a young tourist named Jane, who had been standing closest to the bear. Jane didn't even get the chance to scream before the bear's massive paw struck her, sending her sprawling to the ground. The bear was on her in an instant, its powerful jaws closing around her neck. The others could only watch in horror as Jane's body went limp within mere seconds. The bear's next victim was a local man named Lars. When the bear turned its attention to Lars, the man tried to run, but the animal was too fast. It caught up to him in seconds, knocking him to the ground. Lars, in his desperation to survive, tried to fight back, but again it was no use. The bear's jaws closed around Lars's head, and with a sickening crunch, it ended his life. Panic set in as the group realized the full extent of the danger they were in. They scattered in all directions, hoping to escape the attack, but the animal was crazed. It was a killing machine driven by a primal need to survive, and it showed no mercy. It caught up to the third victim, a middle-aged tourist named Robert, as he scrambled desperately to climb a nearby hill. Just when Robert thought he made it, the bear dragged him back down, tearing into him with its claws and teeth. His screams echoed across the barren landscape, but there was no one around to hear them, no one to help. Once the bear left Robert lifeless, it turned its attention to a local woman named Ingrid. Ingrid had been running towards the town in a desperate bid to reach safety. She thought she had a chance. She thought she made it, but the bear overtook her just as she reached the edge of a snowbank. Ingrid tripped and fell, and before she could get up, the bear was on her. It tore into her with a ferocity that left no doubt that it was fighting for its life as much as she was for hers. The fifth and sixth victims were a young couple in their early 20s, Mark and Emma, who had come to Svalbard on their honeymoon. They had been taking photos of each other when the attack began, and now they were running for their lives. They held hands as they ran, but this just slowed them down. The polar bear was faster. It caught up to them near a small cluster of rocks. Mark tried to shield Emma with his body, but the young man was no match for this terrifying force of nature. It tore them apart, leaving their bodies broken and bloodied in the snow. The seventh and final victim was a local guide named Henrik, who had been leading the group, meaning to give them the best possible experience. When the attack began, Henrik fired a flare gun at the bear, hoping to scare it off, but the bear was beyond fear. Henrik was the last to fall, fighting with everything he had to protect the others. Sadly, his efforts weren't enough. The animal charged at him, swatting the flare gun out of his hands and knocking him to the ground. Henrik tried to crawl away, but the bear grabbed him by the leg and dragged him back. It was over in seconds, but for those who witnessed it, it felt like an eternity. The three remaining survivors, Eric, Kate, and Mike, were in a state of shock. They had watched their friends and loved ones die in the most brutal way imaginable, and they were powerless to stop it. And now it looked like it was their turn to suffer a terrible death. Covered in blood, they huddled together, too terrified to move, too shocked to fully understand what had just happened. But the bear's attack was over. It paid the three survivors no mind as it started eating one of the lifeless bodies. With the bear now distracted, Eric, Kate, and Mike managed to escape. They ran as fast as they could to their lodge. Once inside, they started crying and alerted the authorities. It wasn't long before the authorities arrived, and they responded with swift and deadly force. By the time they arrived, the bear had left, dragging one of the bodies with it. A team of armed men and women tracked the bear to a nearby ridge where it had taken refuge. The bear charged at them as they approached, but this time it met its match. The animal was killed. The threat was over, but the damage had been done. The survivors were left to come to terms with the trauma of what they had witnessed. For the rest of the world, the attack was a reminder of the growing dangers posed by climate change. John Matthews was never more at home than he was in the rugged terrain of New Hampshire's White Mountains. A seasoned hunter in his mid-50s, John had spent most of his life navigating the dense forests and challenging landscapes of the region. He had hunted there countless times, tracking deer through the dense undergrowth, his senses finely tuned to the sounds and signs of the wilderness. John believed the White Mountains had no more secrets for him to discover. John believed there was nothing there that could surprise him anymore. But as he was about to find out, John was wrong. John had grown up in a small town near the White Mountains, where the outdoors was a way of life. His father and mother, both serious people who knew what it meant to survive in the harshest conditions, had taught him to hunt, fish, and respect the wild from a young age. It didn't take long for John to develop his own deep connection with the land, a bond that was strengthened by each successful hunt and each quiet moment spent in the woods. Now, as an experienced outdoorsman, he took pride in his knowledge of the area's wildlife, particularly the deer he was tracking that day. The White Mountains are a harsh and unforgiving place, known for their unpredictable weather and steep rocky trails. But for those like John, nothing was a challenge anymore. The area is home to a diverse array of wildlife, including moose, coyotes, and of course, black bears. These bears, while generally shy and non-aggressive, can become dangerous if startled or if they feel threatened. Like any other hunter worth his salt, John was aware of this. He had encountered black bears before, but had always managed to avoid any confrontations. On this particular day, John was moving quietly through the woods, following the tracks of a large buck he had been pursuing for hours. John's focus was completely on the trail ahead. His rifle was slung over his shoulder, ready for when he got within range of his prey. The air was crisp and refreshing, filling his lungs as he marched on. John was so focused on the hunt that he paid attention to little else. This proved to be a fatal mistake. Unbeknownst to John, a large black bear was nearby, foraging in the underbrush. Black bears, unlike their more aggressive grizzly cousins, are generally wary of humans and prefer to avoid them. However, they are powerful animals, capable of inflicting serious harm if they feel threatened. This particular bear, surprised by John's sudden presence in its territory, reacted out of instinct with all its mighty strength. As John stepped into a small clearing, he suddenly found himself face to face with the bear. It was a massive creature, its dark fur matted, barely concealing the powerful muscle beneath. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. The bear's eyes locked onto John, and he could see the animal's muscles tensing, ready to charge. John instinctively reached for his rifle. He knew using the rifle was his best shot, but by the time he formed this thought, it was already too late. The bear launched itself at him with incredible speed. The bear's charge was unstoppable and deadly. Before John could react, the bear was on top of him, its powerful claws tearing into his flesh. John's scream echoed through the forest as the bear's weight pressed down on him, pinning him to the ground and crushing him. Desperation surged through John as he struggled to free himself. It was getting harder to breathe. The man sensed he was losing this fight, but he couldn't give up like this. He tried to bring his rifle up to shoot, but the angle and the bear's ceaseless assault made it impossible. The animal's claws raked across his chest and arms, ripping through his clothing and skin. The pain was unbearable. For a second, John watched as his blood stained the ground. He watched the animal, taking in its features. It looked less like a bear and more like a demon from hell. The pain was excruciating, but John's instincts kicked in. He had to fight back, had to do something, anything to stop the attack. With every ounce of strength he had left, John punched and kicked at the bear, aiming for its face and eyes. The animal roared in anger, its jaws snapping dangerously close to John's face. He could feel its hot breath on his skin, the rotten stink making his stomach twist. The bear bit down on his shoulder, its teeth sinking deep into his flesh. The pain was blinding, and John knew this was it. His last remaining ounces of strength left him, and then he was ready to go. John stopped fighting and was ultimately overpowered. The bear's relentless attack left him battered and bleeding, his strength ebbing away with each passing second. He could feel his body weakening, the darkness closing in around him as life drained from his wounds. The bear, sensing its victory, delivered a final devastating blow, slashing across John's throat with its claws. The world around him faded to black as he took his last breath. Less than 5 minutes after John took his last breath, other hunters in the area reached the scene of the attack. But it was too late. They found John lying in the clearing, his body mangled and lifeless. The bear had fled the scene in the meantime, disappearing back into the forest as quickly as it had appeared. Some of the hunters had known John and respected him as a skilled and careful hunter. To see him taken down in such a brutal way was a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the wild. News of the attack spread quickly through the local hunting community. Nobody could understand how something like this could have happened to someone like John, who was so experienced. John had been one of their own, a man who knew the woods better than most. If it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. The incident raised awareness about the unpredictable nature of black bears and the need for constant vigilance, even for the most experienced outdoorsman. David Parker, a 27-year-old IT enthusiast from Toronto, has recently discovered his enthusiasm for the great outdoors. After spending the most of his adult life behind screens and in bustling cities, David sought refuge and peace in the middle of nature. He'd become an enthusiastic hiker and camper, frequently retreating to the outdoors on weekends to clear his head. Camping allowed David to unplug from the digital world and reconnect with a part of him that he believed to be more authentic and calmer. David planned a vacation to Canada's Banff National Park in June 2023, with the intention of embarking on the ultimate adventure. Banff, located in the Canadian Rockies, was a breathtakingly beautiful destination known for its towering peaks, turquoise lakes, and many animals. It was a haven for those seeking solitude and a stronger connection to nature. However, it was also home to one of North America's largest grizzly bear populations. David was aware of the risks. He had read the brochures, watched the videos, and even attended a brief bear safety workshop before entering the park. He knew to keep his food in bear-proof containers, cook away from his sleeping quarters, and create noise while hiking to avoid surprising a bear. He believed he had done everything correctly, but he was wrong. On June 11, 2023, after a long day of hiking, David pitched his tent in a remote place near a beautiful mountain lake. The location was ideal, far from the main routes, with a breathtaking view of the surrounding peaks reflected in the river. As night fell, David had a simple dinner beside the lake, taking care to follow all of the recommended bear safety precautions. He then retreated to his tent, feeling calm under the big, starry sky. But in the dark wilderness, danger often lurks unseen. Unbeknownst to David, a hungry grizzly bear was roaming the area. The bear, undoubtedly lured by the aroma of food and potentially no stranger to human presence from past encounters, had been circling the campground. Hunger intensified the bear's instincts, and despite David's precautions, the animal focused on his tent. The attack took place well after midnight. David was deep asleep, unaware of the danger that was closing up on him. The bear approached the tent in eerie silence, its huge form hardly making a sound as it moved through the underbrush. Then, with a sudden ferocity, the animal ripped through the tent's canvas. David woke up to a nightmare, There was a brief moment of confusion in the pitch-black darkness before he realized what was going on. The bear's enormous claws tore through the canvas, slicing at his torso with merciless effectiveness. David hardly had time to scream as the bear's teeth clamped down on his arm and torso. The pain was excruciating, taking his breath away. He attempted to fight back, pushing the bear away, but it was hopeless. The grizzly was too strong, too determined to kill. It pinned David to the ground, crushing him while it continued to attack. David's thoughts were a jumble of fear and disbelief. How could this be happening? He had done everything right and followed every rule. The attack was brief, but it felt like a lifetime. Perhaps sensing that David was no longer a threat, the bear departed into the darkness, leaving him bleeding and broken in the shredded ruins of his tent. David lay there, his life draining away as the chilly mountain air flooded the night. He was alone, in a spot he had come to find serenity that had now become the scene of a fatal encounter with the wild, the scene of his death. He couldn't move, and he could barely breathe. It took hours before he took his last breaths. The following morning, a party of campers passing through the region made the grim discovery. They found David's body lifeless and mangled and quickly notified park rangers. The news of the incident spread rapidly. Rangers tracked the bear using its prints and traces of blood, eventually locating and euthanizing it to prevent further attacks. But David was gone forever, despite all the precautions he had taken. The incident raised serious concerns about the increasing number of bear encounters in Banff National Park, prompting discussions on how to better protect visitors while preserving the natural habitat of these magnificent but dangerous creatures. The forest was alive with the hum of midsummer insects, and the tall pines swayed gently in the warm July breeze, their needles whispering above the ground. Amid this vast wilderness, far from roads and towns, two couples had sought refuge in elevated tree pods, a modern, minimalist form of shelter designed to give hunters and adventurers a safe perch high above the dangers of the forest floor. On the night of July 7th, 2025, those hopes were shattered in an instant by a force of nature no one could tame. The first couple, Anton and Irina, had chosen a tree pod perched 30 feet above the ground. Its slender metal supports were anchored deep into the soil and wrapped tightly with climbing ropes. Anton, a former military ranger in his late 30s, was familiar with the dangers of Siberia's forests. His sharp eyes and calm demeanor had served him well for years. Irina, his wife, was smaller and more delicate in build, but equally determined. Her experience stemmed from years as a biologist studying large mammals. Both were accustomed to the risks, yet nothing had prepared them for what was coming. Across a small clearing, about 50 meters away, Victor and Nadia occupied the second tree pod. Victor, an experienced hunter in his 40s with many seasons behind him, had advised Anton on how to set up the pods and prepare for potential bear encounters. Nadia, younger and new to hunting, placed her trust fully in Victor's knowledge. As night fell, the forest grew quiet. The usual chatter of wildlife faded into the shadows. But beneath the canopy, a different kind of shadow moved with urgency. A Russian grizzly, a massive beast weighing well over 600 pounds, had been stalking the area for days. Hunger and desperation had pushed the bear into bold and erratic behavior. Recent wildfires and drought had scattered its usual food sources, making it more aggressive with each passing day. The bear, an adult male, had a coat darkened with patches of mud and dried blood, and its eyes glinted with raw, desperate hunger. Without warning, the grizzly approached Anton and Irina's tree pod. Its heavy paws thudded against the forest floor as it sniffed the air thick with pine and smoke. It began to circle the base of the supports, methodical and deliberate. Inside, the couple was unaware at first, resting after a long day of trekking and scouting. Suddenly, a thunderous crash shook the tree pod as the bear clawed fiercely at the metal frame. The sound of bending steel and splintering wood echoed through the quiet forest, jolting Anton awake. Irina had already moved toward the small opening in the pod's side when the bear's massive paw slammed against it again, splintering the protective barrier. The bear's claws tore through the thin walls, driven by hunger and instinct. Anton tried to pull Irina back, but panic had overtaken them both. The tree pod, while elevated and sturdy by design, was no match for the raw strength of a determined grizzly. The bear's rage intensified as it began to climb the support beams with frightening agility, its claws digging into wood and metal. Each movement sent violent shudders through the fragile structure. Anton realized the pod wouldn't hold for much longer. Irina's face was pale, her expression caught between terror and determination. In a final act of desperate courage, she leapt from the pod. The 30-foot drop was deadly, but in that moment, she chose it over being cornered inside with the bear. Her body hit the forest floor with a sickening crack, and silence followed. From the second tree pod, Victor and Nadia heard the impact and froze in place, their hearts pounding. They watched in horror as the bear reached the top of the supports, snarling and thrashing as it ripped into the pod's frame. Inside, Anton tried to fight back, but the bear's assault was overwhelming. Its massive jaws sank into his shoulder, dragging him downward as his strength faded. Blood soaked the floor, mingling with shattered wood and twisted metal. Despite his military background and survival training, Anton was no match for the raw, relentless fury of the grizzly. The bear's claws tore into his chest and arms, rending muscle and bone as he struggled to remain conscious. Below, Victor's hands trembled as he reached for his rifle, but the angle made a clean shot impossible. The bear's guttural roars filled the clearing, echoing through the pines with chilling force. Nadia covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face as she watched helplessly, unable to assist or even call for help in time. Hours passed before the forest grew still once more. The bear, having spent its fury, descended the ruined pod and disappeared into the darkness, leaving the mangled structure swaying in the night breeze. As soon as it was safe, Victor descended the ropes and ran through the woods toward the nearest ranger station. Rescue teams were dispatched immediately, cutting their way through dense underbrush with flashlights and equipment. When they arrived, the scene was horrific. Irina lay motionless on the forest floor, her skull fractured by the fall. Anton, miraculously still alive, was barely clinging to life inside the devastated tree pod. Blood loss was severe, and his breathing was shallow. Emergency medics worked frantically to stabilize him. The helicopter flight to a regional hospital was urgent and chaotic. Every minute counted. Despite the crew's efforts, Anton's injuries were too extensive. His body had lost too much blood, and his lungs could no longer sustain him. By the time they reached medical care, he had succumbed to his wounds. Back in the forest, the tragedy left an emotional scar on all who heard about it. Victor and Nadia, physically unharmed, were deeply shaken. The trauma of witnessing such violence so close, yet being unable to intervene, haunted them. They had seen the forest turn from serene to savage in moments. An official investigation followed, but the remoteness of the area and lack of direct evidence limited the findings. The report confirmed that a grizzly bear attack was responsible, citing the increased risk due to environmental stressors like wildfire and food scarcity. Among the local community of hunters and survivalists, the story quickly spread as a cautionary tale. Anton and Irina's deaths served as a grim reminder to all who ventured into the Siberian wilderness. Nature, though breathtaking, held no promises of safety. Even the most prepared could fall prey to its primal forces. The towering pines that once stood as guardians now bore silent witness to a night of terror, a night that underscored the fragile line between human resilience and the raw, untamed world beyond. Every cry breathed with ancient silence, the kind that settled deep and long between the trees, where birch leaves blanketed the trail like gold coins left to rot. The wind slid softly through the branches overhead, stirring nothing of consequence. To Pavel and Yegor, the hush of the woods felt like peace, familiar, almost sacred. They had grown up in Vladivostok, childhood friends turned men, bound by years of shared winters and wilderness hikes. Now in their late 20s, they had returned to the deep woods they'd once dreamed about, tracing forgotten game trails beyond the reach of the last cell signal. It was early October 2015. The leaves had turned brittle and bright. The sun sagged low in the afternoon sky, casting slatted shadows across the undergrowth as they moved in rhythm, boots crunching quietly with each step. Pavel led with a steady gait, taller and broader than Yegor, a forestry worker with strong arms and a quiet confidence in the wild. Yegor followed closely, thinner, more introspective, his camera tucked into his pack, hands in his jacket sleeves. They hadn't spoken in minutes, content in the kind of silence that needed no words. Then they rounded a bend, and the forest broke. Without warning, a blur of dark fur erupted from the trees to their left. There was no growl, no rustle, just speed and intent. A massive brown bear, its body driven by pure muscle and precision, slammed into Pavel with devastating force. There was no time to react, no chance to shout or step back. The impact cracked through the air like a gunshot, Pavel's body folding under the weight as he was hurled to the earth. His back arched unnaturally, his body stilled by the sudden collapse. Yegor stopped mid-step, breath caught in his throat. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He stood frozen, paralyzed by something deep and primal, as the bear clamped its jaws around Pavel's head. There was no struggle, no delay. In seconds, the life was gone. The sound, sickening and final, rippled through the clearing. Blood poured rapidly, painting yellow leaves in wide crimson arcs. The bear's fur was soaked almost instantly. And yet it made no sound, no roar, no panting breath. It simply stood over the body, silent and vast, like a figure pulled from myth. Yegor moved then, but without plan or clarity. He bent instinctively, snatching a rock from the trail and flinging it in a loose, wild motion. It thudded harmlessly to the forest floor near the bear's shoulder. He dropped to his knees, fingers fumbling at his belt for the can of bear spray. But panic had robbed him of coordination. The safety tab wouldn't release. The can slipped from his hands and rolled away into the brush. The bear turned its head toward him slowly, one dark eye catching the fading light. For a single breath, Yegor met its gaze, unblinking, cold, devoid of emotion. The animal did not approach. It did not threaten. It simply paused, then turned back into the birches and disappeared with the same unnatural silence. And just like that, the woods were still again. Yegor remained where he was, kneeling beside what was left of his friend. His hands trembled, stained red to the wrists. The body was broken, twisted in a way no human form should be. Where a face had been, there was now ruin. The trail around him was littered with blood and fragments, the leaves shredded beneath the violence. But even as he stared, the forest began to resume its rhythm, the wind brushing branches as though nothing had happened. He stayed there long after the sun fell. Cold crept in from the edges of the forest. Somewhere, far off, an owl called once, then silence. Yegor did not move to light a fire. He did not seek warmth or shelter. His shoes were missing, or perhaps he had removed them unknowingly. He sat barefoot, legs numb beneath him, unable to look away. When morning came, a search and rescue team reached the clearing. Yegor was still kneeling. His lips were blue. His eyes were bloodshot and glassy. His body trembled in the brittle morning air, barely responsive beneath his thin jacket. He did not react when the team called to him. He did not speak when they lifted him to his feet. His hands were curled tightly around a clump of blood-soaked birch leaves. The rescue crew covered Pavel's remains with a tarp and led Yegor down the trail. He moved without resistance, barefoot and silent, carried more by the arms at his sides than by his own will. The forest, touched by light, appeared unchanged, serene even. The trail they followed looked ordinary. No blood was visible from afar. No sound of violence remained in the air. Only those who had seen it would understand. In the days that followed, Yegor spoke no words. Doctors treated his frostbitten feet, cleaned and stitched the cuts on his hands. Psychologists attempted to reach him, but he stared past them with a gaze fixed elsewhere. His silence became part of the story itself, evidence of the weight left behind by what he had witnessed. He had seen something too powerful, too sudden, too absolute. An official report was filed. The bear was described as a lone adult male, likely startled near a carcass it had been feeding on. Authorities deemed the behavior aggressive, but not unprecedented. The surrounding region was too vast for any effective tracking effort. The bear disappeared into the wild. The area was closed temporarily. Warning signs were posted, but no answers followed. No obvious mistake could be blamed. No clear warning had been missed. It happened as though the forest had willed it and then erased the evidence. Pavel's remains were buried in a closed casket. Yegor did not attend the ceremony. He remained in a small apartment in Vladivostok, silent and withdrawn, often staring at the corners of the room, his hands clenched at his knees. No one could fully access what he remembered, not the true shape of it, but those who knew the story felt the forest had changed. Its silence now carried a weight, something edged with memory and consequence. Somewhere beyond that trail bend, something had acted with perfect certainty, without rage or hesitation. It had taken what it wanted and left without a sound. Hikers still passed through that region, but those who had heard what happened walked more slowly now. They looked over their shoulders more often. Their footsteps softened through the birch groves, and when the trail curved ahead, they wondered just for a second what might be waiting out of sight beyond the turn. Vanished beneath a storm on November 16th, 2017. Snow fell in solid sheets, blotting out the horizon, with wind shrieking across the ice in an endless, scraping howl. At a temporary polar research outpost adrift on sea ice, north of a remote Arctic archipelago, visibility dropped to near zero. The steel modules groaned under the weight of accumulating snow. Everything beyond the portholes dissolved into a wall of white. Inside, the scientists worked in tense silence, aware that the storm could last for days. Jamie Locke, a climatologist in her early 30s with 3 prior polar seasons behind her, was reviewing data logs when the outer alarm pierced the quiet. The mechanical alert indicated movement beyond the perimeter. As others froze in place, Jamie responded immediately. She grabbed the emergency flare gun, threw on her parka, and entered the vestibule. The inner door sealed shut behind her, and the outer door opened into a world of chaos. Wind struck her face with cutting force, frosting her eyelashes within moments. She could barely see her outstretched hand, but faint beams from the station's floodlights carved narrow paths into the swirling snow. Through the dense flurries, she spotted movement near the collapsed equipment shed. Snow poured from the broken roof like loose powder as something large shifted within. A polar bear, dripping with meltwater and heavy with muscle, had torn through the wall and was digging through supply crates, ripping containers open with ease. Jamie raised the flare gun, her fingers numb but steady. From the side of the shed, another figure emerged, Dr. Henrik Dahl, the station's geologist. He moved toward the bear in an attempt to distract it, waving his arms in the storm's roar. The bear noticed him instantly. It lunged through the broken wall and struck with alarming speed. The impact threw Henrik into a snowbank. Before he could recover, the bear clamped its jaws around his leg, dragging him across the ice. His cry cut through the storm, brief and chilling, before fading into the blizzard's roar. Jamie fired the flare gun. A burst of red fire arced through the air above the bear. Sparks scattered into the whiteout, momentarily bathing the scene in a crimson glow. The bear reared back, snarling low, its grip loosening. It turned toward Jamie, eyes locking with hers across the frozen space. For a surreal moment, neither moved. Then the bear backed away, slow, deliberate, and disappeared into the storm. Jamie stumbled forward and dropped to her knees beside Henrik. Blood pulsed from his thigh wound, soaking through his thermal layers. His leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and though conscious, he was pale and shaking. Jamie called for help over her radio, her voice raw and urgent. Within minutes, 2 colleagues arrived with a stretcher dragged through the drifts. They carried Henrik inside and sealed the doors against the storm. The medical kit was already open. The wound was packed with gauze, tightly wrapped, and pain relief administered. His leg was splinted using a steel brace salvaged from broken equipment. Henrik held onto Jamie's arm as his body trembled from shock and blood loss. Then the long wait began. The storm battered the outpost for 4 days. Winds exceeded 100 kilometers per hour. Snow lashed the walls without pause. Communication systems failed. The emergency beacon was buried. Rations were conserved. Shifts rotated, and Henrik's vitals monitored every 2 hours. A fever developed by the second night, and concern over infection deepened. But the bear had not left for good. During Jamie's night watch on the second night, as she sat near a frosted porthole, she caught movement in the outer shadows. Leaning closer to the glass, she saw it again, just meters from the base. The polar bear stood still in the snow, steam rising from its breath, its fur thick with ice. It made no move to approach. Jamie remained motionless. The flare gun was on her lap, but she didn't lift it. The bear stood silently in the storm, watching. Minutes passed, then it turned and disappeared into the white, as quietly as it had arrived. On the 5th morning, the storm broke. The silence felt abrupt, as if the wind had simply exhaled. Rescue teams arrived later that day, having been alerted by a missed check-in and a triggered alarm. Snowcats carved through fresh drifts, lights flashing. Henrik was stabilized and airlifted to safety. Emergency surgery preserved his leg, though the damage meant he would never walk the same way again. Jamie remained at the station during extraction to assist with documentation and structural teardown. She gave her report clearly, detailing the storm, the bear's intrusion, and their emergency response. but certain details she chose not to include. She didn't mention the sound of the struggle beneath the bear's weight. She left out the part where its eyes had locked onto hers without rage or fear, only cold intelligence. She didn't explain the certainty she'd felt, that it could have come closer, but chose not to. Those parts she kept to herself. Years later, what returned most clearly was not the wind or alarms, but the silence. Snow falling in thick, endless quiet. The heat of the flare still glowed in her memory. And above all, she remembered the stillness in the bear's eyes, that moment of silent assessment. It had not come from hunger alone, nor had it attacked out of instinctive rage. It had appeared because it could. And when it turned away, it wasn't retreat. It was The morning sun had only just begun its climb above the jagged northern peaks on May 11th, 2025, when Ranger Eliza Monroe and her small team pushed off in the inflatable riverboat. The quiet hum of the outboard motor blended with the distant cries of seabirds circling overhead and the steady rush of the salmon-filled river. The air carried an unusual warmth for early May, touched with the subtle sweetness of thawing wildflowers that edged the riverbanks and the heavy, damp scent of melting snow clinging to the darker hollows beneath spruce and birch trees. Eliza, a veteran with years of patrolling this remote stretch of wilderness, felt the familiar dual sensation of anticipation and unease. Spring brought the salmon run, a time of abundance that drew both beauty and danger. The river, teeming with life and movement, also carried predators both known and unseen. She was accustomed to its unpredictability, though experience never erased the sharp edge of tension that came with each patrol. Her team that morning consisted of 2 junior rangers and 1 seasonal volunteer. Their training had emphasized maintaining distance from wildlife, respecting boundaries, and never underestimating the power of nature. Yet nothing they had learned in manuals or classrooms could have fully prepared them for what was about to unfold. From a curve in the river ahead, movement caught Eliza's eye, an unnatural swell, a ripple too large for a fish, and then a shadow immense enough to appear almost unreal. She froze, her hand tightening on the side of the boat as her gaze fixed on the figure emerging with startling authority. A massive grizzly stepped into the shallows of the river, fur soaked and darkened by snowmelt and dripping foliage. Its presence alone seemed to command the entire landscape. Every ponderous step sent arcs of water surging outward, rocking the inflatable craft. The bear's paws churned the riverbed, stones scattering and swirling in the current, like marbles caught in a tide. When standing, it easily exceeded 10 feet in height, with a body that Eliza estimated to weigh more than 1,700 pounds, larger than any bear she had ever encountered in her decades of service. Its amber eyes locked onto the vessel, unblinking and alive with a calculating intelligence that stirred a cold knot in her stomach. This was not the aimless gaze of a foraging animal. It was something deeper, curiosity wrapped in the inscrutable instincts of an apex predator. The Rangers held their positions in silence, their equipment momentarily forgotten. Breath became shallow, every sound dampened by the overwhelming presence of the creature before them. Water rippled and frothed around the enormous body as it shifted forward, head swaying with deliberate rhythm, jaws parting in a slow and methodical way that seemed less threatening than investigative. Eliza's heart pounded violently, her pulse echoing in her ears. Yet her years of discipline anchored her to composure. She knew that sudden movements could turn observation into pursuit, and pursuit into disaster. The boat rocked gently in the current, caught in an unspoken standoff where the distance between the bow and the animal carried all the weight of survival itself. Then, without warning, the bear lunged. The explosive shift shattered the fragile equilibrium of the morning. The inflatable boat rocked violently as the creature surged forward, jaws snapping in the air just meters from the vessel's edge. Each closing of its massive mouth released an audible tremor, power reverberating through both water and air. The force of its advance sent waves crashing over the sides, soaking the Rangers as they ducked and braced themselves. Eliza gripped a paddle with both hands, striking it hard against the edge of the boat. The sharp sound reverberated across the river, a desperate attempt to redirect the animal's focus. For a moment it seemed to work. The giant veered, water erupting in wide arcs as it lunged past them, landing with a resonant thud that shook the current. Its massive head whipped side to side as though testing its own strength, curiosity, and control. Struggling against the rush of adrenaline, Eliza forced her arms into steady motion, cutting the paddles into the churning water to stabilize the boat. Her team followed suit, each gesture deliberate, measured against the possibility of provoking another charge. The bear lingered only a few yards away, gaze still locked on them, radiating a presence so dominant it seemed to reshape the river itself. Above, the team's drones captured everything, broad frames of the beast's towering frame, each muscle defined beneath layers of wet fur, the river boiling around its paws, the weight of its steps pressing into the stones below. Cameras clicked from multiple angles, documenting what could never be fully understood by recording alone. The river, so often a corridor of calm broken only by leaping salmon, had transformed into a stage of raw power and primal tension. The rangers sat as unwilling spectators, bound to witness the delicate balance between human fragility and untamed force. Minutes passed, though to Eliza they felt stretched into eternity. Finally, the bear began to retreat, each step measured and deliberate. Water frothed as it moved toward the darkened tree line, pausing only once to cast a long glance back at the trembling vessel. Then, with a final shake of its massive head, it vanished into the forest shadows, leaving only ripples on the river's surface as evidence of its passing. Eliza exhaled, muscles trembling from the aftermath. The boat swayed lightly, the adrenaline of survival leaving both fatigue and exhilaration in its wake. The river resumed its rhythm. Salmon leapt in silver arcs, wind brushed against the tops of spruce, and the ordinary noises of wilderness returned. Yet the impression of that colossal presence lingered, echoing with every heartbeat. By the time the team returned to the ranger station, the reality of the encounter settled over them with weight. The footage they carried would later be studied, dissected, and shared among colleagues. Yet Eliza knew even in the moment that no recording could capture the visceral intensity, the nearly incomprehensible size, or the depth of awe that the living presence had demanded. She understood in a way few reports could convey. The wilderness was alive, imposing, and entirely beyond human control. Even a fleeting moment of focus from such a creature could shift everything. Fear, reverence, and humility tangled together in equal measure. That morning would remain etched into memory, not as documentation, but as living proof of nature's power, reminding every witness of the razor-thin divide between safety and the wild unknown. The July sun rose mercilessly over the dense forests lining the Amur River, its heat pressing downward with an unrelenting weight that thickened the already heavy air. On a small ferry making its morning crossing, passengers shuffled about with practiced ease, their routines shaped by repetition. Fishermen hauled coolers onto the deck, their containers heavy with ice and anticipation. Locals balanced bags of supplies, some heading home, others bound for villages upriver. Families carried lunchboxes and fishing rods, children marveling at the glimmer of sunlight stretching across the water. Scents of packed food, fresh bait, and the faint metallic tang of the deck mingled into the humid air. The ferry's hum underpinned the chatter of voices, a rhythm of ordinary life on an ordinary summer morning. Yet beyond the riverbanks, in the shade of forest slopes, life followed a rhythm apart from human order. Beneath brush and pine, an immense predator moved silently, its presence hidden until instinct compelled it forward. From the steep, overgrown bank, a colossal bear broke from cover. Its fur was thick, sun-bleached in patches, muscles shifting under its mass with deliberate strength. Paws struck earth with a heavy cadence, amber eyes scanning the clearing. The scents of fish, blood, and discarded food drifted from the ferry, a lure irresistible to senses honed for survival. In one explosive surge, the animal leapt. The impact of its landing thundered across the deck, reverberating like a drumbeat. The sudden arrival threw the vessel into chaos. Crates toppled violently, their contents scattering in waves. Coolers skidded, slamming against railings before bursting open, ice and fish spilling across the floor. Bags tore open, belongings strewn into the scramble. Passengers screamed, voices sharp against the open air, shattering the calm of the river. For a moment, there was no order, only the raw force of fear. Some clutched the railings as the deck pitched beneath them. Others darted toward the far end of the ferry in desperate search of distance. A few froze in place, powerless to move as the massive form advanced. The bear swiped at obstacles, claws tearing deep gouges through wood and metal alike. Splintered crates shattered at its strikes, Railings shrieked under the scrape of steel-hard claws. Its strength left no doubt of the fragility of everything before it. Among the crowd was Viktor Sokolov, a man seasoned by years on rivers, familiar with the rhythms of wild country, yet unprepared for such direct confrontation. The bear's path cut straight toward him. His retreat was instinctive but futile. A massive paw slashed across his chest and shoulder, the strike lifting him from his feet and casting him down again in one fluid, violent motion. His clothes tore open beneath the blow, deep gashes slicing into skin and muscle. Blood surged, staining the boards beneath him. His gasp was ragged, his body shuddering as shock clashed with adrenaline. The crew reacted as best they could. Grabbing whatever lay at hand, poles, oars, splintered planks, they rushed in bursts of desperation, swinging to create distance, shouting to drive the beast back. The blare of the ferry's horn rolled across the valley, its mournful tone both distress call and weapon. The noise unsettled the animal, its head jerking with each blast, yet agitation made it no less dangerous. Its attention shifted from noise to movement, then to the pungent spill of food smeared across the floor. Every step shook the thin deck, reverberations warning of the power contained in its frame. Each swipe threatened to crush or tear, each pivot unpredictable. The passengers scattered in waves of panic, rushing, stopping, then scattering again as the predator turned with alarming speed. Coolers and bags disintegrated under its claws. Food ground into the floor. The air grew thick with the mingled smells of blood, sweat, and fear. Victor's condition worsened with every passing moment. Blood poured freely down his chest, his hands trembling as he pressed feebly at wounds too deep to staunch. His face turned pale, breaths shallow, each inhalation more strained than the last. Those near him wanted to help, but the bear's shifting presence kept them frozen. Every attempt to reach him risked drawing the predator's attention. Time stretched unnaturally, fear bending seconds into minutes. The horn shrieked again and again, harsh against the animal's ears. The crew struck metal against railings, the clanging reverberating in sharp echoes. The bear turned its massive head, unsettled but unwilling to relinquish the ground. It paced, swiping at the air, then wheeled suddenly back toward the crowd. Terror stretched the standoff until the moment broke. With one last shake of its head, the predator recoiled. Muscles rippling, it bounded to the edge of the vessel. With a powerful leap, it vanished into the shadows of the forested riverbank. In its wake, silence fell, startled, uneven, broken only by sobs and the hiss of shallow breaths. The deck lay strewn with blood, torn crates, and scattered possessions. The chaos hung in the air long after the calm of the river reasserted itself. Victor did not survive. Despite frantic efforts from crew and passengers, his injuries ran too deep, blood loss too severe. His death was a brutal reminder of how quickly natural order could overtake human structure. The ferry, once routine transport across a broad river, now carried the scars of tragedy. In the days that followed, questions spread through nearby communities. How had such a disaster unfolded? Could it have been prevented? Or was it simply the inevitable clash of human presence and wild territory? For those aboard, no answer erased memory. They carried it in their voices, in the tremor of their hands, in the way their eyes tightened at mention of the river. The lesson etched itself deep, even in places shaped by human schedules and routines. Control was never absolute. A single shift in instinct from a predator could collapse order into catastrophe. On the waters of the Amur, ferries continued to cross. Yet for those who remembered, each passage carried a new weight, the knowledge that beneath the surface of routine, nature's force waited, vast and unpredictable, commanding eternal respect.